It's on the weekly Torah portion. This week is the Parsha of Devarim. We begin the book of Deuteronomy, fifth book of the Torah. But this Shabbos is also a very special one, as it is the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, before the fast of the 9th of Av, and it is called Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbos of vision. Now, this year, the 9th of Av actually occurs on the Shabbos itself. So the fast day, if there will be one, will be postponed till Sunday. The reason why I say if there will be one is because we pray and hope and anticipate the coming of Mashiach every day. And if he comes today, or the latest, if he comes by Shabbos, there will be no fast day this coming Tisha B'Av, because Shabbos will push it away and then it will be pushed away forever. But in the event, God forbid, we are still in exile and we still have to fast on Tisha B'Av, we have an unusual situation where we're actually fasting not on the 9th of Av, but on the 10th of Av. It's pushed off. Now, so this Shabbos is actually both Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbos in which we read about the vision of Isaiah, and I'll soon explain a little bit more about what that vision entails. And it's also the Shabbos of Tisha B'Av, which is actually a very positive and very holy time, because as our sages tell us that Tisha B'Av is a festival. In the days of Mashiach, it will be transformed into an overt festival and celebration. It will be the greatest holiday of all the holidays of the year. And even now, as we have celebrated or observed Tisha B'Av in the past, it was observed in a spirit of sadness over the destruction of the temple. Underlying that sadness is a sense of hope and faith that Mashiach's coming is imminent. Indeed, the Jerusalem Talmud and the Midrash tell us a fascinating story, that when a certain Jewish farmer was taking care of his farm work, he was told by his Arab neighbor, who had certain prescient or clairvoyant powers. When he heard the moo of the cow, he said, "Your temple has just been destroyed. Stop farming." A minute later, he told him, "You can continue farming because," and the cow made another sound, "your Mashiach, the one who will deliver you from exile and rebuild the temple, has been born." What that means is that the soul of Mashiach entered into the world at that time, and had the generation been ready, and had they changed their errant ways, that would have been the time of redemption, and there would have been no exile. So Tisha B'Av is the anniversary of the time that Mashiach's soul comes into this world. So that means spiritually we are energized with the energy of Mashiach, of redemption, on this day of Tisha B'Av, even when Tisha B'Av is a fast day. Why is it called Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbos of vision? Because in addition to the weekly Torah reading, we also read a selection from the Haftorah, the prophetic reading, which is the first chapter in Isaiah. And that begins with the words Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos, the vision of the prophet Isaiah. Now, simply the reason why we call this the Shabbos of vision is because we read a selection from the prophets that begin with the word Chazon, which means vision. But the truth is that it's much deeper than that, because the vision of Isaiah is not a positive one. It's one about the impending destruction for the people who had not changed and mend their ways. Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, the famous Hasidic master who always saw the positive in everything, had a different take on why it's called Shabbos Chazon. When I say different, I don't mean that it contradicts the official reason. It just gives you a deeper understanding of the official reason. That underlying the negative is also the positive. And what is it? And he uses a parable. The parable is of a father who sews up a beautiful suit for his son, whom he loves dearly, and the son doesn't take care of the suit and has it ripped, so the father gets upset at him, but he gives him another suit, even more beautiful than the first, and again the son rips it. So the father sews up a third suit and doesn't give it to his son, and he says, "I'm putting it away in storage. When you learn to behave, I will give it to you." And every now and then the father will take out this beautiful suit, exquisitely beautiful, much more beautiful than the other two, and he shows it to his son, and he says, "I'm giving you the vision, I'm giving you the appearance. You could see the suit that's waiting for you. When you change your ways, you will get this suit." And so too, we lost the first temple, the beautiful, exquisite temple. We lost the second temple because of our sins. And God says, I'm not ready to give you the third one. I will create the third one. I will prefabricate it, as it were, and it will be waiting in heaven for you to change your ways. But every year on this Shabbos, the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, or this year the Shabbos of Tisha B'Av, God takes this temple out of its hiding place, out of its storage place, and shows it to each and every one of us, and says, this is the temple that you will soon be getting. Do something to earn it, change your ways. And that is what this Shabbos is all about. It's when every one of us has a vision of the future temple. Now, the weekly Torah portion, as I mentioned before, is the beginning of the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. There are 5 books of Moses. The 5th book of Moses is very different from the first 4. The first 4 books, Moses is simply the conduit. He's channeling God's words. He is taking God's words, only passing through his vocal cords, just like someone who speaks through a loudspeaker. What comes out of a loudspeaker is identical to the words that are uttered into the microphone. There is absolutely no change, although it's channeled through the device, the electronic device. The same way the first 4 books of Moses, God's words were channeled through the mouthpiece, you could say, of Moses. But really, it's God's own words verbatim. The 5th book, the book of Deuteronomy, on the other hand, is the book that Moses put God's words of the first 4 books into his own mind, articulating them through his way of communicating, albeit, the Talmud says, with Ruach HaKodesh, with divine inspiration. So there's a qualitative difference between the first 4 books and the 5th book. The 5th book is the book that Moses translated into his own thought processes. Why was that necessary? Because the Rebbe explains the first 4 books of Moses on their own are so sublime that there would be no way that we could really absorb that. Yes, we could read it and translate it and understand the very superficial aspects of the narrative, but we wouldn't capture its divinity because it's too far from us. It's too distant. It's transcendent. And therefore, when Moses took the Torah, the first 4 books, and translated it into his own mind, he was able to take the most sublime ideas and bring it down to the level of each and every one of us. And the Rebbe continued, and this is a very powerful thing, that the power to take something infinite and put it into a finite mind so that it becomes accessible to everyone requires power that is even greater than the infinite power of Torah. That means in the 5th book of the Torah we have God's supra-infinite, because God manifests himself, and this is a very deep subject which we won't go into, but let me just mention it very briefly and we'll go on to the next thing. God manifests himself in 3 ways. He manifests himself within the natural world. God manifests himself within the supernatural world. And then God manifests himself as he is beyond the supernatural, beyond the infinite, and beyond the finite, enabling us to fuse the infinite with the finite. That is the significance of the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, the 5th book of the Torah. And that is the book that we start reading this Shabbos. Now, the Sfas Emes, one of the great Hasidic masters of the Gera Hasidic dynasty, says something very interesting. We know that of all the commandments in the Torah, there's one commandment that stands out as being extremely fundamental and significant according to the Jerusalem Talmud. It's the most important positive commandment. It's the most significant expression of our faith in God, of our understanding of God, our affirmation of God's unity, and that is the mitzvah of tefillin, tying the tefillin on our arm and on our head. Now, the 2 different boxes that we use for the tefillin are very different. They contain the same material, the same subject matter, 4 paragraphs of the Torah in which the commandment to put on tefillin is mentioned. However, the shel yad, the one we put on our arm, has only 1 scroll, whereas the shel rosh, the one that we put on our head, has 4 separate compartments with 4 separate scrolls. What does that signify? That signifies the difference between the mind and the action of a human being. Both have to be dedicated to God, permeated with the feelings of the heart, because we put the tefillin next to the heart. But the difference between the mind and action is action does not go into the understanding of the subject. When you try to take a subject and break it down to its component parts, that's the way you have the ability to grasp the subject. So the Shel Rosh, the head tefillin, are divided into 4 compartments, symbolizing the idea of the intellect dividing the subject into its component parts. The Shel Yad, the hand tefillin, by contrast, is singular, it's unified, it's just simple devotion to doing what God says, regardless of what the significance of each commandment may be. So what Risvas Emes says is that the first 4 books of the Torah correspond to the Shel Rosh, to the head tefillin, which contain 4 different compartments. The book of Devarim corresponds to the hand tefillin. The Baal Shem Tov once said that the difference between the head tefillin and the hand tefillin is that the head tefillin represents the scholars. The hand tefillin represents the simple people. The Talmud tells us that just like we put on tefillin, God puts on tefillin. His tefillin are the Jewish people. So when God puts on his head tefillin, the head tefillin represent the scholars. So that's when God focuses on the elite, the spiritual elite. When God puts on his hand tefillin, that means he's focusing on and connecting to the simple Jews. And the Baal Shem Tov added, what do we do first? We first put on the hand tefillin. Even though the head tefillin is more sophisticated, what takes precedence in God's eyes? What does God cherish most? Not the spiritual elite, the intellectual elite, not to minimize the importance of that, but God prefers and cherishes the simple Jew, the one who serves God with simplicity and sincerity. Of course, you could be a great scholar and you could also be sincere, but the challenge, and that is actually the challenge that we all have, is that to grow in our knowledge and at the same time maintain that simplicity. That corresponds to the book of Devarim. We also have in other works the idea that the first 4 books of the Torah represent the 4 different exiles the Jewish people had to go through. Throughout Jewish history, we've been driven away from Israel. We've been taken over by foreign powers that try to harm us, to minimize us, to water down our Judaism. And there were 4 general periods of history. One was the Babylonian exile, the Babylonian king who destroyed the temple on Tisha B'Av. About 500 years later, it was the Romans who did it. But in between the Babylonians and the Romans, you had the Persians, with Haman, who tried to annihilate the Jewish people, and the Greeks, who tried to assimilate the Jewish people. So in all, there are 4 different exile: Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman exile, and everything that followed the Roman exile is all considered to be part of that and a continuation of the Roman exile. So the first 4 books of the Torah represent the power that the Jews had to endure the 4 different exiles. The 5th book is about the redemption, the final redemption. So the 5th book has this distinction that it is the book that gives us the power to get out of Golos, to get out of exile. And a good part of the book is about the idea of redemption. In fact, one of the major sources of the Messianic age is in the book of Deuteronomy. And this might be one of the reasons we read this before Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av represents the day that focuses on the harshest aspects of our exile. But in order to endure that, we have to know that we will get out of this exile. So even before Tisha B'Av, we start reading the 5th book that represents the final redemption from all the exiles. Now, in the very beginning of the book of Devarim, in the very first verse, where it says, "These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel across the Jordan, in the wilderness, in the plain, opposite the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea, between Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Chatzeros and Dizahav." And Rashi comments that these are different places, some of them are different places where the Jewish people angered God by the sins that they committed in those places. One of the places doesn't even exist. Dizahav means abundance of gold. That is a hint to the golden calf. What is Moses doing over here? Moses is hinting to the Jewish people about the sins that they committed in the desert in all of these different locations. Why does he have to hint? So Rashi says, "Mipnei kvodon shel Yisrael," because of the honor of Israel. He wanted to preserve their honor. Later on, Moses is not so subtle. Later on, he unleashes a tirade of harsh rebuke to all of the sins that they committed in the desert. So the question can be asked, why did he start off reprimanding them subtly, and then he changes that to being a little bit more harsh? Well, this has a down-to-earth, halachic, legal teaching. Maimonides rules in his Mishnah Torah, in his famous code of law, that when you see someone doing something wrong and you have the ability to influence that person, you have an obligation to rebuke that person. But you first have to rebuke the person gently, subtly, calmly, and then, in the event that it doesn't work, you could start to increase the intensity of the rebuke. But initially, you have to begin doing it subtly. And there are two reasons. And if we study the words of Maimonides, we'll see that there are actually two different reasons for that. One reason is it works better. It accomplishes much more. If you do it gently and subtly and without anger and malice and without anger, you can accomplish much more. It's the first reason. So if you could accomplish more, why would you do something that will be less effective? The second reason is it has nothing to do with accomplishment. It has to do with the idea that there is something about preserving the honor of a person. That even when you rebuke them, you should try to preserve their honor. Try not to put them down. Try to be as gentle as possible. Even if that wouldn't be as effective, that is the proper approach. And that's exactly what Moses was doing. He starts off first very softly, and then he tells us that sometimes you need to have tough love, and you can go ahead and increase the tempo, increase the volume, if you will. But there's also a deeper understanding, another explanation given in Hasidic works. And this is related to another story of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. Before Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, he calls in the biggest sinner in town, the man who has committed every sin imaginable. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak summons him, and he expected to get a tongue lashing from the rabbi before Yom Kippur, and instead, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak lovingly looks at him and says, "I'm so jealous of you." And he's startled. He says, "You're jealous of me? What are you, laughing at me? You're mocking me? How could you be jealous of me?" And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, "No, I'm not mocking you. I'm very serious." He said, it says in the Talmud that when a person does tshuva, when a person returns to God, and the return is sincere and motivated by love for God, you could transform every sin into a mitzvah, into a virtue, into a merit. He says, I could never do as many mitzvahs as you have done sins that will now be converted into mitzvahs. In other words, not only are we capable of changing our status from now on for the future, we could control the past as well. We can take everything we did wrong in our past and transform it into virtue, to transform it into a mitzvah. And that's why Moses starts off very gently, very subtly, because if he started off harshly, it might backfire. So he starts off gently, and by doing that, the people were so inspired when they heard the love that came through Moses' rebuke that they did tshuva. They repented, because when Moses spoke to them with love, there's a famous rabbinic saying, Devarim hayotzim min halev nichnasim el halev upoalim pu'ulasam. Words that come from the heart enter the heart and will have their intended effect. So when Moses showed his love for them, even in his rebuking of them, they responded with their love for Moses and love for what Moses stood for God. And they did tshuva, they repented out of love. Moses says, now you repent out of love. I'm going to list every sin that you've done in the past, because every one of those sins has now been transformed into mitzvahs. And I'd like to just throw in a very important thing about the power that we have in our generation. The question has been asked many times by many people. We believe that Mashiach will come, and we're hoping and praying and anticipating his arrival imminently. And we ask ourselves the question, who are we to think that we are worthy and deserving of Mashiach? After all, for thousands of years, there were such great people, the Talmudic sages, the great rabbis that followed the Talmudic area, Rashi, Rambam, and later sages, Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe, and all the greatest and holiest of people who gave their lives for serving God, and they couldn't bring Mashiach, and who are we, the little nobodies, compared to them, and we're going to bring Mashiach? And there are basically two answers that are given, and I like to throw in a third answer based on what we said before. The first answer given is, yes, we might be small people. We're like the little child standing on the shoulders of giants, and you're taller and you can see further because you're standing on someone else's shoulders. We have the cumulative good of all the generations that preceded ours, so we're standing on their shoulders. We have all their energy, all their power, all their accomplishments, and added on to that, we have our own. That's one classic answer. Another classic answer that the Rebbe would give is that we are indeed a very special generation because we are a generation that has lived through the worst types of persecution, and we have lived through the most strident attempts at assimilating us, at causing us to lose our identities as Jews. The freedom that we have is unprecedented in all of Jewish history. We've never had so much freedom and so many opportunities to lose our identities, and in spite of that, we as a people, for better or for worse, maintained our loyalty and faithfulness to God. There's something very special about us, and there's a whole story about Moses, how he was humbled when he was given a vision of our generation that brought him to his state of humility, but that's for another time. But I'd like to add there's a third possible explanation, what makes us unique. Not only are we standing on their shoulders, not only do we have our own great accomplishments that make us special, but we have all the sins of the past as well that have been transformed into mitzvahs. Just like Moses was recounting the sins the Jews did in the desert that preceded the generation to whom he was addressing this, the generation that was going to enter into Israel, and he's telling them, according to that interpretation that I shared with you, that their sins have now been transformed into virtues. The same thing could be said about all the sins of the past through our loving approach to God, which is really the hallmark of our generation. People who have come close to Judaism are not doing so out of fear of punishment, out of fear of ridicule. It's motivated by sincere conviction and love for God and for Judaism. Therefore, we have the power to transform all. Not only do we have all the mitzvahs of the past in our repertoire, in our arsenal, we have all the transgressions of the past that have been transformed and converted into mitzvahs. And with that power, we will certainly bring an end to the sad aspect of Tisha B'Av and usher in an age of redemption and celebration of this Tisha B'Av. Everyone have a good evening, a good Shabbos, and it should be a Shabbos, a very joyous one that will lead us to the ultimate redemption, when we will all be celebrating together with Mashiach in the third rebuilt Beis HaMikdash, Holy Temple.